by making the beginning. The balance can fall in place. We want the triangle, and then we'll start our chevrons next. Triangle needs to sit over the edges roughly 1/4, and above the top roughly 1/4. I pin it there. Then I take my next piece. Let's say it's going to be this piece. I put it here. I get with a sewing machine. Give yourself roughly 1/4 inch seam allowance. Now you do have a lot of wasted fabric with this, but if you're using your scraps, leftover pieces from other quilts and other projects, it does not bother you that much that you're going to have a little bit of leftovers. You want to go down beyond your line here just a little bit, because you remember your 1/4 inch here. Match it up. You want to fold this over just to make sure. See, if I go all the way down to this fabric, I will not have this corner covered. So come up roughly to your line, slightly below it. Fold it over. Make sure that you're covering up your side lines here. So now we will bend this back in the machine. And there we go, an additional piece will be added in just a few seconds here. Depending on what you use as your foundation piece, you may want to use a walking foot, or a regular foot like I'm using this time will work great. Stitch line here for the last piece you'll put on. Back it off. You don't need to run all the way because you need to trim off this excess up here. You do not need your lines all the way down the stocking, because it's going to be a piece on one side, a piece on the other side, back and forth the whole way. Your starting point complete, you are fine. Now with this, we found out our piece here would not come high enough, so we had to come up here on this edge. You will lay your piece on top, match up down at the bottom, match up at the top. Make sure your piece goes beyond your background fit. And when you would turn it over, you need to make sure it's still going to be beyond it down here. Always when you add your new piece, make sure you hand press it backwards, finger press the seam down. You can use the sharpness of your fingernail as an extra pressure point. One thing I didn't show you is I want to show you, remember the lines I said we have? Well, you notice that some of my strips are now larger than my beginning line. That beginning line was just to get you going in the right directions. Now, we have no lines, and we just keep putting, we'll put this one on, then we'll put this side back and forth till we get all the way to the bottom. Another thing I'd like to mention is that as you go down, back and forth, change off your colors. You see I have colors here. You don't want a whole bunch of the same colors right next to each other. You want to trade them off with the different Christmassy colors. The intensity is different from the green in the background here. You see me putting a pin in it as I lay my next piece on. I've done that just so as I slide it under the presser foot, it does not slide out of the position I have chosen for it. right in the center part with one pin until I get it started. See, this piece, with me laying it here, folded it over roughly the quarter, I'm going to be missing part of the toe of the stocking. Now, if you don't mind it a little stubby toe, that's fine. But if you want it all the way, look through your stash of fabrics that you have left over from Christmas projects, and either get a solid red or green for Christmas, or one of your colors, and cut a little bit larger piece. What I decided to do is to find a blue, because I had one blue up above. Now this brings the blue throughout all the way down, and now we need to find a little piece for this. And I think we're going to find another color just like this one to tip off the toe. This is your Christmas stocking minus the top piece. What we do before we put on the top piece, we'll turn it over backwards. If you can see the stocking shape with the extra fabrics around about, we're going to take this and sew right on the stitch line to hold these top fabrics flat. Then we're going to turn this back and trim off the points before we add our top piece. Okay, we found a piece that will fit across our top. We got a pretty green with snowflakes on it. You see our sew line, that's our line. So we want to come roughly a 1/4 inch above that on both sides. Turn it over. If you're not sure of where you are, you can always stick a pin in through on that line and check it out. Let's see what we have here. Okay, this is down more than a 1/4, and this is a little bit less than. So the more than a 1/4, we'll change just a little bit. And say we're happy with it. The one that was a little bit less than a 1/4, we're going to give it a fraction more. And say we're happy with it. I will put a pin in the middle. That's not middle top, that's middle of the piece, just to hold it so it doesn't slip up or down as I'm sewing. As I start and I secure my needle, I do remove, when I secure the sewing machine needle, I remove the needle holding the fabric in place on the edge. Now, make sure I get this right. Yep. We sew across this line one more time. And you can feel your needle in the middle if you've got the ball head needles. Remove the pin on this side before you cross it. Never run across your needle. Your safety straight pin with your sewing machine needle, because you may break your sewing machine needle. Okay, now what we have, we'll turn it back over so you see the right side. We'll take our pretty green, fold it up. As you can see here, a little bit of my stitching did show through, so I could go back over that and stitch just a little bit below that line. Make sure there is no stitching showing. Make sure yes, our lines are all covered. Finger press this piece down. Since this fabric feels a slight bit thicker, we're going to put a couple pins right in the seam line to hold it totally in the upright position. Start at the very top on the stitch line. Or if you're really confident, you can go just a little bit beyond the stitch line, because when you go to sew your back on, you don't want to have to double sew it in case your seam shows. So let's sew just a fraction on the outside of our final stitch line. This will hold our interfacing and our edges down so that we can trim. And you'll want to trim up to roughly a 1/4 inch from the edge. The excess fabric from around the edges If you have given your interfacing slightly the stocking shape, you do not have to cut really close, because once you get your back on, you will want to pink the edges. And that way, when you turn it, it will turn much easier for you. So we're giving a foundation spot for pinking by leaving that extra little bit on there. Shape and felt for our stocking. First, we want to do face to face, lay it up, adjust your sizing. It looks fairly good this way, just a little off. Look at the other side to make sure you got all the bases covered, so to speak. I would suggest you use a walking foot. Be sewing across the very top, of course, because you need to have that open for turning. Okay, here we go. Change it on my machine. Only takes a minute or less. Now, when we turn this, we're going to add a white piece of fur to the top. So we want to leave one side open so we have plenty of excess for laying this down and getting the fur sewn in. So what I do is I take one of my larger headed pins. In this instance, it's a hat pin. And I mark a spot where I want to make sure I stop sewing. Here, I spot right down on where my sewing line is, and I do give myself a little back stitch to start with. And now you want to make sure you sew right on that line. You do not want your stitching that when you sewed around the first time to secure the different pieces from showing through to the front, or you'll have to turn it back and re-sew it again if you've used a thread, excuse me, that shows up. Now, one thing I did not do, and I meant to mention this to you, remember how I finger pressed everything? You can take it to the ironing board and iron it down, which will make it flatter and maybe feel better for your sewing. Now, here's where I'm going to stop. Do not want to run over that needle. It's very large shaft. Now I'll go backwards. Raise my foot, trim. Now, I'm actually ready to pull out these securing pins. They held it in place. I am ready to get my pinking shears and trim around, and I will show you what it looks like after it's been trimmed. And we just finished our pinking. As you can see, we've pinked all the way around the edges so that as you turn it, it will turn. Normally, I trim the top and then I put the white on before I turn it. But let me show you what the front. Now we've turned it inside out. I did not trim off the top, but you could do a little stitch around here, or you can leave it like this. You need to put your white fur on the top. And I will have to show you that in addition to what I've got here so far when I get my fur out. But as you can see, the many colors have added very colorful depending upon what fabrics you use to the brightness and the colorfulness you put in here. You could put all children's fabric. You could put all poinsettias. It's up to you. It's totally red felt with a lot of thread lint on it right now. Remember I spoke about that? This is so when you sew the fur around the top, you've got a little extra space to get into it. All right, let's say the fur is all sewed on. And remember, you'll sew it on backwards, or what appears to be backwards. I am ready to sew the white on the top. I have cut this, I measured around, and I cut this 19 inches by 4 inches. And now we'll put the face of it against the wrong side. And we will start to stitch. When you come to the edge where you have your felt and your regular fabric, turn the felt toward the regular fabric. The reasoning for this is that the felt is thicker than fabric, and so you will have a smoother intersection. Go around, you may have to lift your presser foot to adjust your fabric. Secure at the end. Threads. Now, this looks wrong, of course, until you turn everything. Now, you take this part we've just added, the white fur, and you'll turn it down over the top. But first, before we do this for our finished look, we need to come to the back side. Okay, now we've got the fur sewed all the way around the top. We want to make this closure on the back side a little smaller. So I am measuring up only the fabric part and the red batting. The red felt, staying down approximately 1/4 to 1/2 inch from the white fur. Secure it. Cross over your stitches prior on the stocking. All right, now we have it sewed close to the white. The reason we didn't cover the white, because if you did, you would have this seam on the outside, and you want that seam to be covered. So now what we do is we turn our stocking Now we'll match up these seams, and if you noticed, it's just a little bit longer than what this seam is because that seam is turned under. This seam we want this direction so it can be hidden. Make sure you've got your seam laid exactly in the center. Put it under your presser foot again. And now stitch from this point to the top. Secure, because there may be lots of stress on this in the future once it's given as a gift. Because your hope is that this will be used for year after year. Now, we'll turn this down to see what our finished look looks like. And as you see, there's no raw edges at the top here. It's all smooth, and the raw edges we did have is all covered with the white of our top turned down. And voila, there you go. And voila, your finished stocking.